The moment the first cry echoed through the sterile, brightly lit delivery room, Harper Sullivan thought she might finally be able to breathe again. After 37 grueling hours of labor, 3 terrifying emergency alarms, and a sudden, precipitous drop in her blood pressure that had sent the medical team into a frenzy, her triplets were alive. They were tiny, impossibly fragile, but they were alive. Hot tears of exhaustion and profound relief blurred her vision as she reached out with a trembling, forebruised hand, desperate to touch at least one of them, to feel the warmth of the lives she had fought so fiercely to bring into the world. Instead, a silver pen and a thick stack of legal divorce papers were pushed abruptly into her line of sight. Cole Maddox, her husband, stood at the foot of her hospital bed in a flawlessly tailored charcoal suit, looking completely untouched by the visceral chaos around them. His expression was cold, impatient, and terrifyingly detached, as if he were reviewing a tedious corporate contract at his Manhattan firm rather than watching his wife literally fight for her life. "Sign it, Harper," he said quietly, his voice devoid of any warmth or humanity. "Let's make this clean. Those babies, they're not mine." The harsh words cut deeper and with far more agony than the surgical incision burning across her abdomen. Harper tried to lift her head, tried to find the strength to speak, but her throat was dry, and her voice cracked into a pathetic, broken whisper. "Cole, please. Not now." But he showed no mercy. He had already leaned over and placed the heavy pen between her trembling fingers. Her hand shook uncontrollably, not from the physical trauma she had just endured, and not from the fear that had been her constant companion for months, but from the shattering realization that the man she had loved unconditionally for 7 years couldn't even wait until she was safely off the operating table to discard her. He reached over and signed his own name with a swift, confident, and merciless stroke. A nearby nurse gasped audibly in horror. Another turned her face away, unable to mask her disgust. The anesthesiologist muttered a sharp curse under his breath. But Cole didn't flinch. He didn't care. He casually dropped the stack of legal papers onto her thin hospital blanket, leaned in close to her ear, and whispered, "Enjoy your new life with whoever fathered them," before turning on his heel and walking toward the door. The room felt suddenly, unspeakably colder. Then there was a tentative knock. A delivery nurse stepped into the tense atmosphere, holding a newborn identification chart to her chest. She glanced at Cole, confusion tightening her brow as she blocked his path to the exit. "Sir, before you leave, we need to confirm something for the records." She looked down at the official forms, then back up at his arrogant face. "Are you the father?" Cole froze mid-step, clearly annoyed by the delay. And what the nurse said next made the entire room stop breathing. Harper Sullivan had spent most of her life being invisible, and for the longest time, she truly believed it was safer that way. Growing up in a fading, blue-collar neighborhood on the outskirts of Boston, she learned early on that dreams were fragile things, easily broken, easily mocked, and easily taken away by a world that didn't care. Her mother worked exhausting double shifts as a diner waitress just to keep the lights on. Her father had disappeared somewhere between a bottle of cheap whiskey and a broken promise when she was just a girl. As a result, Harper became the child who stayed quiet, the girl who made herself small so the heavy world wouldn't collapse on top of her. But even the quietest girls carry fierce storms inside them. From the moment she stepped into nursing school, Harper finally found her purpose. She wasn't the smartest in her class, nor the fastest, but she was the one who held a premature newborn's tiny hand through its first shaky, uncertain breaths. She was the one who whispered words of profound comfort to terrified mothers who felt their entire world was falling apart in the waiting room. She was the one who stayed hours past the end of her shift, not for the meager overtime pay, but because she simply couldn't bear the thought of a sick baby lying all alone in a cold, plastic incubator. Nurses didn't make much money, and the hours were punishing, but for the first time in her life, Harper finally felt like she mattered. Then she met Cole Maddox. He walked into the hospital lobby one snowy evening, tall, sharp-featured, and radiating a magnetic confidence that made the world look like it belonged exclusively to him. He was there visiting a sick colleague, but his piercing eyes kept drifting back to Harper. She had her red hair tied up in a messy bun. Her blue scrubs rumpled from a grueling 16-hour shift, and her smile was a little tired, but unmistakably genuine. Cole approached her and told her she had a brilliant light inside of her, something incredibly rare and beautiful. Harper believed him, mostly because she so desperately wanted to. She didn't know then that some people only admire the light so they can find ways to extinguish it. Their first year of marriage felt like a beautiful, cinematic dream. They shared simple, romantic dinners in their tiny Queens apartment, enjoyed cozy movie nights curled up on a thrift store sofa, and had long, whispered talks about their future. Harper truly thought she had finally found a safe home. Then, the corporate promotions started rolling in. Cole entered the cutthroat world of Manhattan finance, a pristine ecosystem where image mattered far more than truth, and ambition mattered infinitely more than loyalty. Slowly, subtly at first, the man who had once made her feel so seen began to treat her like a lingering inconvenience. He criticized the long, unpredictable hours she worked at the hospital. He told her she wasn't polished or sophisticated enough to attend his firm's elite networking events. He flatly told her that a lowly nurse's salary didn't match the grand lifestyle he was building. And then, one devastating day, he made it clear that she simply wasn't enough for him anymore. Still, Harper held on, especially when the unthinkable, beautiful miracle happened. After years of trying and failing to conceive, after countless nights spent crying quietly on the bathroom tiles so Cole wouldn't hear her heartbreak, she found out she was pregnant. Not with one baby, and not with two. 3. Triplets. Her hands shook violently as she held the glossy ultrasound printout, staring at a miracle multiplied by 3. She had joyfully imagined Cole lifting her off the floor in pure excitement, crying with her, promising that they would get through anything together. Instead, when she showed him, he stared at the black and white screen in a stunned, horrifying silence. Then, he whispered the cruel sentence that would haunt her until the very day she gave birth. "Harper, that's impossible. I can't have kids." He showed her a highly clinical medical report, one she didn't know had been secretly altered to fit a malicious narrative. He accused her of vile infidelity. He threatened her with an immediate divorce. He packed a bag and walked out of their apartment for 3 agonizing days. But Harper stubbornly refused to give up. These babies were hers. They were her second chance at a real family, her one chance to rewrite the tragic, lonely story she grew up with. She carried them through debilitating nausea, through the suffocating heat of their cramped apartment, through exhausting double shifts on her feet, and through endless nights completely alone. She would rest her hands on her swollen belly, feeling each tiny heartbeat, and whisper, "I'm here. I'm not leaving." She didn't know that the moment she brought them into the world, the man she loved would betray her in the cruelest way imaginable. And she certainly had no idea that someone else was about to step into her fractured life and change absolutely everything. New York City had a unique way of swallowing people whole, especially those who came with soft hearts and quiet, gentle hopes. Harper Sullivan had learned this bitter truth long before the triplets, long before the ultimate betrayal, and long before she found herself lying on a delivery table under blinding surgical lights while her world collapsed in agonizing slow motion. She lived in a cramped, 4th-floor walk-up apartment in Astoria, Queens, the kind of narrow space where freezing winter winds slipped effortlessly through old window frames, and summer heat clung to the peeling walls like a wet, suffocating blanket. The kitchen barely had enough room to fit a stove, and the bedroom was hardly bigger than a walk-in closet. But to Harper, it had always been a sanctuary. It was a place where she imagined bringing home her babies, rocking them to sleep in the small wooden crib she had carefully bought secondhand from a dusty thrift store on Steinway Street. Every morning, she rode the crowded N train into Manhattan for her shifts at St. Victoria Medical Center, a towering, historic hospital nestled tightly between sleek glass high-rises on East 68th Street. It wasn't a glamorous life, but it was hers. It was her routine, her absolute purpose. The polished white linoleum floors, the soft, rhythmic beeping of cardiac monitors, the familiar echo of metal carts rolling down the long hallways, it all reminded her that she belonged somewhere, even if her own house no longer felt like a home. Cole, meanwhile, lived in a different New York entirely. His reality existed in mirrored boardrooms on the 42nd floor of a prestigious Park Avenue tower, where men in bespoke tailored suits closed deals worth tens of millions of dollars before lunch, and celebrated with lavish dinners that cost more than Harper's entire monthly rent. His colleagues drove sleek black Mercedes and wore imported watches that flashed arrogantly under crystal chandelier lights. He fit right into that ruthless world, slipping into his ambition the exact same way others slipped into a warm, comfortable coat. Harper had never belonged there, and the deeper Cole moved into that opulent life, the more she faded from his view. Their marriage had begun in a modest, loving apartment and ended in a cold, sprawling penthouse she rarely stepped foot into. Cole point-blank refused to bring her to company events. He said she looked too tired, that her hands were too rough, that nurses didn't really fit the high society vibe. He started coming home later, then occasionally not at all. And when he finally stopped pretending to care, their world split cleanly and violently in two. His world of polished Italian marble, and her world of scuffed hospital floors. The tragic clash between those two worlds became undeniable the night Harper went into early, terrifying labor. A massive snowstorm hammered against the apartment windows as she collapsed onto the floor, struggling to breathe through the blinding pain of the sudden contractions. She called Cole first, 3 times. There was no answer. He was attending a lavish corporate banquet at the Plaza Hotel, where crystal chandeliers sparkled over overflowing champagne towers, and Verena, his beautiful, calculating assistant, hovered closely at his side. Harper was forced to take a yellow cab all alone, gripping the cracked leather seat in agony, as pain tore mercilessly through her lower body. The city blurred past the icy windows, Fifth Avenue, Central Park South, the rushing, frantic lights of ambulances crossing snowy intersections. She arrived at the emergency room soaked in cold sweat, violently shaking and utterly terrified. Inside St. Victoria's maternity ward, the atmosphere swung wildly between organized chaos and desperate urgency. Doctors rushed through the swinging doors. Machines whirred and beeped warnings. Nurses whispered frantic updates and counted racing heartbeats. Harper's vision blurred into a dizzying smear as the contractions worsened, as her blood pressure plummeted dangerously, and as the bright world narrowed into a terrifying tunnel of white noise. Cole arrived only when it was already far too late to pretend he actually cared. He didn't rush to hold her hand. He didn't touch her sweat-dampened forehead. He didn't even bother to ask if she was okay. He simply stood stoically at the foot of the bed, handed her the freshly printed divorce papers, and told her the triplets weren't his. But the hospital had one more massive surprise waiting for him, one he never could have predicted in his wildest, most arrogant dreams. Because someone else had stepped up to fill the role he had so callously abandoned. And the hospital paperwork already carried that man's name. If Harper was the quiet, resilient force trying to hold her fractured world together, then Cole Maddox was the raging storm tearing it apart. He hadn't always been that way, at least not in the very beginning. But immense power has a funny way of revealing the absolute truth about people. And for Cole, the truth was an ugly, rotten thing wrapped securely in an expensive designer suit. Cole grew up in a wealthy, unforgiving New England suburb where social reputations mattered infinitely more than morals or kindness. His father, a harsh, emotionally barren, and deeply calculating hedge fund manager, had raised him to firmly believe that all emotions were weaknesses, and weakness was a terminal disease. Cole learned at a young age how to charm, how to brilliantly manipulate, and how to win at all costs by stepping on others without ever leaving visible footprints. By the time he reached the competitive jungles of Manhattan, he had flawlessly mastered the art of appearing deeply respectable while entirely hiding the moral rot beneath his skin. Harper never saw that rot, not until it was far too late to escape. Cole didn't simply drift away from her when massive success finally came. He pulled away deliberately, brick by brick, methodically replacing affection with sharp criticism. Then chilling silence, then outright cruelty dressed up as logic. He blamed her for his immense workplace stress. He blamed her for not magically matching his newfound elite lifestyle. He blamed her for wanting the loving family he wasn't sure he could ever give. But absolutely none of that compared to the devastating impact of Verena Lowe. Verena entered Cole's life with a smile so flawlessly polished it looked manufactured in a laboratory. As his newly hired junior analyst, she dutifully carried spreadsheets, catered expensive lunches, and typed up meeting notes. But beneath her soft, unassuming voice and shy, deferential posture was a razor-sharp, insatiable hunger. Verena didn't just want a high-paying job. She wanted a lavish future built entirely on someone else's ruin. And she specifically chose Cole the exact way a starving wolf chooses the weakest deer in a panicked herd. Quietly, patiently, and with terrifying, unblinking focus. The very first time Harper met her, Verena offered a handshake that was perfectly polite but inherently cold. Her sharp eyes scanning Harper's thrift store sweater with a barely concealed glimmer of total superiority. "You must be Harper," she had said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "Cole talks about you sometimes." Harper didn't know it then, but Verena had already illegally accessed Cole's highly encrypted health records. She already knew about the minor, updated medical note stating Cole had extremely low fertility. She already perfectly understood how to twist that minor detail into a lethal weapon. And she did. Night after night, she cornered Cole in the dimly lit office long after everyone else had gone home, offering fake sympathy, offering endless validation, and eventually offering herself. She was the one who deliberately planted the poisonous seed in his mind. "Triplets? With your specific medical condition. Cole, you really need to think logically about what that means." Cole eagerly listened because he wanted an out, because seeding doubt fed his massive ego far more than the complicated truth ever could. From that exact moment, Verena crafted the false narrative with surgical, psychopathic precision. She doctored a digital copy of his fertility file to make it look like absolute sterility. She actively encouraged him to distance himself physically and emotionally from Harper. She brilliantly played the innocent victim when he felt guilty, the loyal confidant when he felt insecure, and the passionate lover when he needed to feel powerful. By the time Harper entered her grueling third trimester, Verena had become the dark, whispering shadow behind every cruel, unforgiving word Cole spoke. And now, inside the tense hospital waiting room, she stood proudly beside him, her perfectly manicured hand brushing his expensive sleeve as if she had officially earned the right to touch him in public. When the nurse asked, "Are you the father?" Verena's glossed lips curled into a delicate, victorious smirk, acting as if she already knew the harsh answer Cole would undoubtedly give. But what she didn't know, what neither of these arrogant people knew, was that the universe had been quietly, methodically preparing a massive reckoning. A reckoning that began with a single signature on a dotted line. A reckoning that continued with the discovery of a falsified medical report. A reckoning that would violently end their perfect little conspiracy in a spectacular way neither could ever escape. Because at that very moment, someone highly unexpected walked into the hospital hallway. And the fierce look on his face told them that their web of lies had finally reached the wrong person. The hallway right outside the delivery suite had gone eerily, uncomfortably silent. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating silence that feels like the agonizing moment right before a massive storm violently splits the sky. Nurses lingered nervously near the walls, pretending to look busy with clipboards, but completely unable to tear their wide eyes away from Harper's closed door. Something catastrophic had taken root there, and absolutely everyone on the floor felt it in their bones. Cole Maddox stood rigid, his jaw locked tight, the signed divorce papers tucked casually under his arm like a golden trophy he had rightfully earned, rather than a beautiful life he had selfishly destroyed. Verena hovered closely beside him, her slender fingers grazing his sleeve every few seconds, subtly claiming a territory that wasn't legally or morally hers. Every single gesture she made was highly rehearsed, the overly concerned tilt of her head, the soft, dramatic whisper, the way her eyes followed him with a manufactured, unwavering devotion. She was aggressively playing the role of the new woman in his life before the old one had even finished giving birth to his children. Then came the nurse's simple, routine question. "Sir, are you the father?" It was meant to be purely routine, a standard medical formality for newborn identification tags. But in that highly charged moment, the simple words sliced the heavy air wide open. Cole stiffened, glancing sideways at Verena, who gave a faint, highly confident smile, as if she fully expected him to deny everything on the spot and walk away a free man. But that's not what made every head in the hallway snap around. It was the medical chart resting in the nurse's hands. The official hospital records list Dr. Rowan Hale as the emergency guardian and legal signatory for all 3 infants. "We simply need confirmation from you for the long-term documentation," the nurse stated clearly. The color instantly drained from Cole's handsome face, leaving him looking sickly and pale. "What did you just say?" His voice cracked in a high-pitched way no one had ever heard from him before. Verena stepped forward quickly, her perfect composure slipping. "There must be a massive mistake. Dr. Hale, why on earth would he sign anything? Cole is the husband. His name should absolutely be on every single form." The nurse frowned, looking completely unbothered by their arrogance. "Sir, you signed a pre-delivery refusal earlier this evening. It legally grants the hospital the right to appoint the next available guardian in the event of a dire medical emergency." Cole blinked rapidly, deeply confused, his mind desperately replaying the rushed forms Verena had shoved at him hours earlier. Forms he had signed without reading, because she had told him they were just standard liability waivers to protect his assets. But Verena wasn't confused. She was actively panicking. Harper didn't ask him to sign that. Verena insisted loudly. She barely even knows Dr. Hale. A shocked murmur swept through the crowded hallway. Everyone in the building knew Dr. Rowan Hale. He was calm, brilliant, and famously, unshakably ethical. He was the kind of doctor families prayed to get when facing a life-or-death emergency. His direct presence meant the medical situation had been infinitely more serious than Cole or Verena had ever realized or cared about. The heavy door opened at the far end of the hallway. Rowan stepped out. He was tall, remarkably steady, and still dressed in his surgical scrubs, which were visibly streaked with the grim remnants of a night spent desperately keeping Harper alive. His dark hair was messy and tousled, his jaw was tense, and his eyes, normally warm and deeply empathetic, were sharp with a quiet, terrifying fury. He walked purposefully past the whispering nurses, past the wide-eyed families in the waiting area, and stopped directly in front of Cole. "You weren't here," Rowan said, his calm, deep voice cutting sharper than any shout could. "She was dying. The babies were crashing. Someone had to act." Cole scoffed defensively, desperately trying to recover his shattered ego. "You had no right to do that." Rowan stepped a fraction closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous, low octave. "And you had absolutely no interest. You left her to die. You left them." A ripple of pure shock traveled through the gathered crowd. People whispered behind their hands. Cell phones were discreetly raised. Someone had started recording. For the very first time in his charmed life, Cole saw his pristine reputation violently slipping out of his manicured hands. Rowan continued, unrelenting. "Harper survived because she fought like hell. Your children survived because this hospital fought for them. And you." He didn't get to finish the sentence because just then a piercing, high-pitched monitor alarm erupted from inside the delivery room. Harper's heart rate was crashing violently. Cole instinctively spun toward the door in shock, but Rowan was already running back inside. And the moment they crossed that sterile threshold, absolutely everything they thought they understood was about to crumble into dust. Harper felt her fragile consciousness slipping in and out like dark ocean waves forcefully pulling her under the surface. Frantic voices blended into a distant, unintelligible hum, bright overhead lights blurred into long, sickening streaks, and every single breath felt like dragging freezing air through a chest full of shattered glass. She could faintly sense rapid movement around her, gloved hands aggressively adjusting plastic tubes, the sharp metallic click of surgical instruments, rubber-soled shoes rushing frantically across the floor. She knew she was in deep trouble long before anyone actually said the words aloud. Her chest felt incredibly heavy, too heavy to bear. Her limbs tingled sharply, and then went completely, terrifyingly numb. And somewhere behind the thick, mental haze, she remembered Cole's voice. Cold. Final. Abandoning her at the exact, horrifying moment she needed him the most. That's when she broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, so quietly it would haunt her dreams later. A single, solitary tear slipped down her pale cheek, entirely unnoticed by the medical chaos erupting around her. It wasn't from the agonizing physical pain. It was the specific kind of profound heartbreak that comes when the very last thread of hope finally snaps. The kind that steals all the oxygen from your lungs and replaces it with a dark, hollow ache that absolutely nothing can fill. "She's losing pressure," a panicked nurse shouted over the din. "We need to stabilize her right now." Harper desperately wanted to speak. She wanted to tell them that she was fine, that she just needed a tiny moment to rest, that she wasn't ready to leave her beautiful babies all alone in this cold, unforgiving world. But her dry lips wouldn't part. Her voice wouldn't rise above a silent plea. Instead, her fading mind drifted into warm memories she didn't consciously choose. Her mother's warm, calloused hands tucking her into a small bed. Her younger, optimistic self promising that she'd be a completely different kind of parent. Her very first positive pregnancy test, the impossible miracle she thought she'd never, ever have. Cole smiling at her once upon a time, back before corporate ambition and toxic lies carved him into someone entirely unrecognizable. Then, a much darker memory violently surfaced. The sickening sound of Cole whispering, "They're not mine," as she lay completely helpless on the delivery table. That vile sentence wrapped itself tightly around her failing heart like a tightening, iron fist. Her breathing hitched erratically. Monitors screamed in distress. "She's crashing." A plastic oxygen mask was pressed tightly over her mouth. Warm, steady hands supported her lolling head. Someone yelled frantically for epinephrine. Someone else shouted desperately for Rowan. Through her blurry, fading vision, she saw him. Rowan Hale appearing directly at her side like a powerful storm, perfectly contained in human form. His sharp eyes swept rapidly over her, assessing, calculating, and aggressively fighting back panic with years of practiced, brilliant medical control. "Harper, stay with me," he said, leaning down close to her ear. His voice was remarkably steady, incredibly grounding. "You're okay. You're safe. I've got you." No one had said those protective words to her in a very, very long time. Another tear slid free, soaking into her hair. "Rowan." Her BP is dropping incredibly fast. "Get me a second central line," he barked with absolute authority. "We're not losing her. Not today." His strong hand found hers amidst the tangle of wires. He squeezed it, firm, warm, and certain, as if his sheer, unadulterated willpower could physically anchor her soul to the living world. "Think of your babies," Rowan said softly, his eyes boring into hers. "They need you. You hear me? They need their mom." Her heartbeat stuttered wildly. It flatlined for just a terrifying fraction of a second, setting off a horrific, continuous tone on the monitor. Then it surged again. It was weak, but it was present. Rowan forcefully exhaled, profound relief flashing brilliantly in his dark eyes. "That's it. Fight it. Don't you dare give up on me now." Harper's vision began to dim further, vibrant colors rapidly draining into a wash of dull gray. Sounds stretched and warped hideously. Her mind felt exactly like a large room with the lights being clicked off, one by one. But just before the absolute darkness fully swallowed her, she heard a voice she never expected. It was cold, furious, shaking with total disbelief, and shouting from outside the room in the hallway. "What do you mean her babies are legally registered under another man's name?" Cole yelled. Verina's voice answered him, trembling in raw, unhidden panic. "They're saying Dr. Rowan Hale signed everything." Harper's weak heart lurched one final time, and then the world went entirely dark before she could hear the rest of the explosive confrontation. Harper drifted endlessly in and out of a heavy, medicated consciousness for hours. She was suspended in a thick, gray fog where voices blurred together and the overhead fluorescent light pulsed like distant, dying stars. She didn't know how much time had actually passed when she finally fluttered her eyes open, the soft, rhythmic beeping of the vital machines gently welcoming her back to the land of the living. Her breathing was much steadier now. The hospital room was dim and quiet, the air cool against her clammy skin. But she wasn't alone. Rowan Hale was seated in a hard plastic chair directly beside her bed. His elbows rested on his knees, and profound exhaustion was deeply etched into his posture. His blue scrubs were severely wrinkled, and his dark hair was completely disheveled from running his hands through it 100 times in stress. Yet his eyes, when they finally lifted and met hers, held a deep, comforting warmth she didn't entirely understand yet. "You scared the hell out of us," he said softly, a small, tired smile touching his lips. Harper desperately tried to speak, but her throat burned like sandpaper. Rowan immediately stood up, poured a small cup of ice water from a plastic pitcher, and carefully lifted it to her chapped lips with a tenderness she hadn't experienced in years. When she could finally form words, they came out rough and cracked. "My babies, are they okay?" "They're absolute fighters," Rowan said, his smile widening with genuine pride. "Stronger than anyone expected them to be. They're stable in the NICU for now." A wave of pure, unadulterated relief washed over her, so intense it pulled another hot tear free from the corner of her eye. But the peaceful moment was short-lived. A shadow of deep pain flickered quickly across Rowan's handsome features, something he tried and ultimately failed to hide from her. "Harper, there's something we need to talk about," he said gently, sitting back down. Her heart instantly thudded unevenly against her ribs. "What happened? What did I hear out in the hallway right before I passed out?" Rowan exhaled a long breath. The hospital was legally required to list a guardian during the dire emergency. Cole wasn't here. You weren't conscious, and you were fading fast. Medical protocol absolutely required someone else to sign the paperwork to authorize the emergency care for the premature infants. "And you?" Harper whispered, staring at him. "I was the chief physician on duty, so yes, I stepped in and signed it." He paused, then added quietly, "The babies legally carry the last name Hale until the custody paperwork officially changes." Harper's breath hitched in her throat. The thought of her beautiful children being legally linked to a man she barely knew, officially carrying his name, felt entirely surreal. But strangely, it didn't feel wrong. It felt safe. "But that's not the real issue right now," Rowan continued, his voice lowering to a serious murmur. "Cole's fertility records. They were completely altered." Harper blinked rapidly, trying to clear the lingering brain fog. "Altered? What do you mean?" Rowan stood up and retrieved a thick manila file from the counter. His movements were slow, careful, as if handling a live explosive. His medical chart in the hospital database was illegally edited. Lab values were changed. Diagnoses were entirely fabricated. He met her eyes with a fierce intensity. "Cole isn't infertile, Harper. He never, ever was." The room seemed to violently tilt on its axis. "But he showed me the papers. He showed me the official printouts," Harper stammered, her mind racing. "He said he couldn't." "He fully believed they were real," Rowan interjected smoothly. "But someone else had high-level access to his health system profile. Someone who knew exactly what medical codes to change to convince him." The horrific implication rang loudly in the quiet, small room. "Verena," Harper whispered, a cold chill creeping rapidly up her spine. Rowan nodded grimly, continuing, "And there's much more. When you passed out earlier, the NICU doctors pulled additional genetic markers to rapidly verify parentage for emergency blood matching in case the babies needed transfusions." Harper's pulse quickened to a frantic pace. "What did they find?" Rowan hesitated just long enough that her stomach dropped to the floor. "The triplets' genetic markers are a 99% match with Cole's. They are biologically his." Her breath hitched painfully. The long, agonizing months of doubt, the vile accusations of infidelity. The cold divorce papers shoved into her violently shaking hands while she bled on the operating table. All of it was based on a massive, fabricated lie. A lie someone desperately wanted Cole to believe. A lie that had nearly ruined her life. "Why?" Harper whispered, her voice trembling with absolute devastation. "Why would someone do that to me?" Rowan's jaw tightened in anger. "You need to know something else about Verena Lowe. She wasn't just Cole's ambitious analyst. She attended your specific nursing program years ago." Harper's eyes widened in shock. Her memory flashed backward. Verena's cold, calculating handshake. The faint, knowing smirk. The specific way she had looked at Harper like she already knew all her hidden weaknesses. "She sabotaged you once back then," Rowan stated firmly. "Stolen scholarship records, lost recommendation letters. She has a very long, documented history of aggressively targeting you." Harper felt her pulse hammering loudly in her ears. This wasn't cruel fate. This wasn't a tragic accident. It was highly calculated, deeply deliberate, and extremely personal. Before she could process the revelation, a frantic knock sounded at the door. A young nurse peeked in, breathless and wide-eyed. "Dr. Hale, there's a huge problem in the NICU. Someone is trying to force access into the triplets ward." Rowan's expression hardened instantly into stone. "Who?" he demanded sharply. The nurse swallowed nervously. "Cole and Verena." Harper's blood ran ice cold. And in that terrifying instant, she realized the nightmare wasn't over. It had only just begun. The morning after the terrifying NICU incident felt like waking up in a completely different lifetime. Harper sat upright in her hospital bed, no longer trembling, no longer drifting in and out of debilitating fear. Something deep inside her soul had fundamentally shifted. Maybe it was the sheer shock of the awful truth. Maybe it was the reality of nearly losing her life on that table. Or maybe it was finally realizing that she had spent 7 long years shrinking herself for a pathetic man who was completely incapable of loving anything he couldn't control. Whatever the true reason, the woman who opened her eyes to the morning light today was absolutely not the same woman who had begged Cole to stay. A soft, polite knock sounded at the door. Nurse Priya slipped in with a warm, encouraging smile and a small, rolling floor mirror. "You asked for this," she said gently. "Are you absolutely sure?" "Yes," Harper whispered, her voice steady. "I need to see myself." Priya positioned the mirror at the foot of the bed. For a long, terrifying moment, Harper didn't look. She tightly braced herself for the haggard exhaustion, the sickly paleness, the deep, dark circles carved violently under her eyes. But when she finally gathered the courage to lift her gaze, she froze. She didn't look weak. She looked fiercely alive. Her cheeks held a rosy color again. Her vibrant red hair, though messy, framed her face with a surprising, fierce softness. Her eyes, though undeniably tired, held a brand new clarity, a hardened, unbreakable resolve. For the first time in years, she finally saw her hard-working mother's unwavering strength looking back at her. "Let me help you freshen up," Priya offered kindly. Together, they carefully braided Harper's thick hair, smoothed out the wrinkles in her hospital gown, and washed the dried, salty tears from her face. It wasn't exactly glamorous, but it felt remarkably like rebuilding a shattered house. Piece by piece, breath by breath. When Rowan entered an hour later carrying a cup of coffee, he paused dramatically in the doorway. "You look." His deep voice trailed off, something powerful and unspoken flickering across his handsome face. "Better. Strong." Harper managed a small, genuine smile. "I feel awake." Rowan pulled up a chair beside her, his expression shifting into something much more serious and professional. "We massively tightened security at the NICU overnight. Cole and Verena won't get anywhere near those babies again without explicit legal authorization." A tiny spark of maternal fear flickered in her chest, then quickly faded into determination. "Good," she said firmly. "I'm completely done letting them decide the course of my life." Rowan studied her intensely for a moment. "You sound very different." "I am different." She straightened her back, glancing toward the large window where bright, early sunlight spilled warmly across the linoleum floor. "For years, I truly thought my only purpose was to make my difficult marriage work, to be enough for him, to constantly prove my worth. But I don't belong in his shadow. I don't belong in anyone's shadow." Rowan's eyes softened with profound respect. "You never did." Harper continued, her voice steadying with every word. "When I'm discharged, I want elite legal counsel. I want official DNA confirmation. I want hard documentation of the falsified medical records. The security footage, everything. I'm not bending to his will anymore. If Cole wants a war, he'll get a spectacular one. But this time, I'm not walking into it blind." Rowan nodded slowly, deep admiration threading visibly through his expression. "I'll help you however I possibly can." But Harper shook her head resolutely. "No. This part one need to do myself." Still, Rowan didn't fully step back. He reached into his coat and handed her a thick, sealed envelope. "What's this?" she asked. "You'll need it," he said simply. Inside was a heavy, embossed business card, an introduction to Fairchild and Lawson, one of the most ruthless, respected family law firms in all of Manhattan. It was the kind of elite firm only the ultra-wealthy ever hired. The name alone carried weight like forged steel. Harper swallowed hard, looking at the card. "Rowan, I can't afford this." "You can," he interrupted smoothly, "because I already covered the massive retainer." Harper stared at him, utterly stunned. "Why? Why would you do that for me?" Rowan hesitated, his strong jaw flexed, and his dark eyes flickered with something incredibly deep. Something he wasn't quite ready to speak aloud yet. "Because someone should have protected you a very long time ago, and because you deserve a life where you're not constantly fighting just to survive." Her breath caught in her throat. Before she could form a response, a loud, demanding voice drifted into the hallway. It was sharp, cold, and sickeningly familiar. Cole. He was back, and he wasn't alone. Because the very next voice Harper heard complaining to the nurses was Verena's. The sprawling executive boardroom on the 42nd floor of Maddox Financial had never been this oppressively quiet. Floor-to-ceiling windows beautifully framed the iconic Manhattan skyline, casting a cold, intimidating blue light across the polished glass tables. It should have been a busy morning like any other. Junior analysts shuffling financial papers, senior partners reviewing quarterly projections. But instead, every leather seat was filled, every eye was sharp, and the nervous tension in the room crackled like static electricity. Because today, Harper Sullivan had come to officially end the man who had tried to erase her. She didn't walk in alone. Rowan Hale entered right beside her, flanked tightly by two high-powered attorneys wearing predatory expressions that clearly said they had already won the case. Harper wasn't dressed in flimsy hospital gowns or wearing her exhaustion this time. She wore a stunning, dark green wrap dress that set her red hair aflame under the bright fluorescent lights. Her posture was impeccably straight, her chin lifted high. She wasn't the fragile, weeping woman Cole had tried to discard in the delivery room. She was the fierce mother of 3 children he had foolishly abandoned. And she was the woman he never, ever thought would rise again to face him. Cole stood nervously at the far end of the long table, his trademark confidence visibly cracking at the seams. Verena was firmly planted at his side, wrapped in a fitted designer blazer, desperately pretending she actually belonged in the executive room. But her panicked eyes darted every few seconds toward the expensive lawyers, toward Rowan, and toward Harper, looking exactly like a trapped animal. "Let's just get this over with," Cole said loudly, trying and failing to sound in absolute control. "You can't just forcefully barge into my company like this." Rowan raised a dark eyebrow, totally unimpressed. "Actually, we were invited." He casually tossed a thick legal file onto the glass table. "By your board of directors." Loud gasps rippled across the room. The oldest board member, a stern, unyielding woman with perfectly styled steel-gray hair, leaned forward, her hands clasped. "Mr. Maddox, your wife, your legal wife, has officially presented incredibly serious allegations regarding falsified medical records, intentional emotional harm, and attempted access to a restricted hospital NICU without authorization." Cole's face reddened with furious embarrassment. "This is insane. She's lying. She's—" "Enough." Harper's voice was remarkably steady, crystal clear, and devastatingly calm. She slid a neat stack of hospital documents across the long table. "These are the corrected, certified copies of your actual fertility results. And these—" she placed a second, thicker folder directly atop the first, "are the extensive digital footprints showing exactly who altered them in the hospital database." Verena visibly blanched, her skin turning an ashen white. Harper's attorneys confidently displayed enlarged, high-definition screenshots on the boardroom projector. Login timestamps, specific IP addresses, internal security alerts, all pointing undeniably to one single person, Verena Lowe. "No," Verena whispered, shaking her head frantically. "That's impossible. I didn't. I couldn't." Rowan stepped closer, his gaze piercing through her lies. "You illegally accessed a highly restricted medical portal using old credentials you stole from a retired administrator. You forged sensitive medical results. You maliciously manipulated Cole into destroying his marriage. And then you tried to illegally enter the NICU to interfere with infants again." The board of directors erupted in outrage. Cole staggered back a step, as if he had been physically struck in the chest. You did this?" he asked Verena, genuine shock on his face. Verena snapped, her carefully crafted mask completely shattering. "You were supposed to leave her," she shrieked hysterically. "You chose her over me every single time. Even when you didn't realize it. I had to make you see the truth." "That wasn't truth," Harper said quietly, looking at the pathetic woman. "That was dangerous obsession." Verena lunged forward suddenly, pointing at Harper with violently shaking hands. "You don't deserve him. You never did. He's mine. He—" Building security burst into the boardroom, having been summoned earlier by Rowan's foresight. Verena shrieked like a banshee as the burly guards seized her flailing arms. Cole didn't move an inch to stop them or protect her. As she was forcefully dragged out the doors, she screamed wildly, "This isn't over. You'll regret this, all of you." A heavy, stunned silence fell over the executives. Cole looked around the room, absolutely panicked. "You can't take her word over mine. She's a lunatic. She's trying to ruin me." But Harper was already calmly opening the final folder, the one that would utterly destroy what little remained of his professional and personal reputation. Inside were the certified DNA results confirming the indisputable truth Cole had screamed wasn't possible. "You were the father, Cole," Harper said softly, ensuring every single board member heard her. "And you knowingly abandoned your own sick children." The board froze in disgust. Cole swayed on his expensive Italian leather shoes. His carefully built empire trembled violently under his feet. Then, Rowan placed a warm, supportive hand on Harper's shoulder. "Harper," he murmured affectionately, "you did exactly what you came here to do." But Harper wasn't done quite yet. She stepped forward, her green eyes locked dead onto Cole's panicked face, her voice trembling slightly with overwhelming strength. "This is only the beginning." And at that exact moment, the grim-faced board chair announced a formal vote. One that would legally decide Cole's financial fate forever. The corporate vote didn't take long, but its massive impact echoed like rolling thunder. Cole Maddox stood frozen in the center of the boardroom as the very people who had once deeply admired him, who had once called him a financial visionary, raised their hands one by one in overwhelming favor of his immediate removal as CEO. There was absolutely no hesitation. There was no remaining sympathy. There was just a cold, clinical silence and the undeniable sound of a corrupt kingdom completely collapsing. Cole's throat bobbed aggressively as he tried to swallow his immense shock. "You can't do this to me. I built this company from the ground up." The chairwoman decisively closed the heavy folder in front of her. "And you nearly destroyed it. Reckless behavior, massive ethical breaches, and gross negligence impacting not only your employees, but your own flesh and blood. We cannot legally or morally entrust this firm to someone who repeatedly prioritizes his own ego over basic integrity." Harper watched the spectacular downfall without speaking. She didn't gloat maliciously. She didn't smile in triumph. She simply stood quiet and still, exactly the way an exhausted soldier stands at the edge of a bloody battlefield after the thick smoke finally clears, not joyful, but deeply resolute. Cole turned to her, his eyes wild and completely unhinged. "You're doing this," he yelled. "You're turning everyone against me." "No," Harper said softly, shaking her head. "You did that all on your own." His frantic gaze darted around the large room, desperately searching for someone, absolutely anyone, to take his side and defend him. But Verena was gone in handcuffs. His former colleagues stared back at him with carefully neutral, disgusted expressions. He had no powerful allies left. 2 security guards approached him slowly. Cole stumbled backward. "I'm not leaving. This is my company, my name, my legacy." But the stoic guards each took a firm grip on his arms, guiding him forcefully toward the exit door. He didn't fight them, not truly. His legs suddenly weakened beneath him, his broad shoulders visibly sagging. The crushing weight of consequences, real, unescapable consequences, became far too heavy for a privileged man who had spent his entire life skillfully avoiding them. Just before he disappeared through the heavy oak doorway, he looked back at Harper one last time. There was profound, naked fear in his eyes. A fear she had once felt deeply, but vowed she would never, ever feel again. When he was finally gone, the room collectively exhaled. The board of directors turned their attention respectfully back to Harper, offering quiet, polite nods and subtle acknowledgments. It wasn't pity they offered her, it was genuine respect. She had endured horrific humiliation, betrayal, and abandonment, and had still found the immeasurable strength to stand before them and demand justice. Rowan stepped closer to her, his voice low enough for her ears alone. "It's over, Harper." But she shook her head slowly. "No, not yet." He studied her beautiful profile. "What's left?" Harper lifted her chin defiantly. "My children deserve ironclad legal protection. Full, unshared custody. And Cole will definitely try something desperate and reckless once he fully realizes what he's permanently lost." Rowan nodded slowly, agreeing. "Then we prepare for war." As they exited the towering glass building, a massive swarm of reporters had already gathered in the lobby downstairs. Cameras flashed blindly like a lightning storm, and microphones were aggressively thrust forward. The sensational headline was already rapidly spreading through the Manhattan grapevine. "Disgraced CEO removed after paternity scandal and medical fraud." Harper raised a hand instinctively to shield her eyes from the flashes, but Rowan gently and smoothly shifted in front of her. securely blocking the barrage of cameras with his broad body. "It's okay," he murmured reassuringly over the noise. "I've got you." His towering presence, steady, calm, and incredibly solid, felt exactly like a vital lifeline. For the first time in a very long while, Harper realized she wasn't forced to survive this nightmare alone. Outside the building, the bitter winter wind whipped fiercely through the busy streets, but she felt strangely, wonderfully warm inside. It was as if something incredibly heavy had finally been lifted off her weary chest. She had bravely walked into the blazing fire and come out much stronger. Still, a troubling question nagged at the back of her mind. "Do you really think Cole will just disappear?" she asked as they walked to the waiting car. Rowan exhaled a plume of white breath into the freezing air. "Men exactly like Cole don't disappear, Harper. They retaliate." Harper swallowed hard. The bright city lights blurred behind the rapidly falling snow. "Then I need to be completely ready." Rowan stepped closer, his dark eyes searching her face intently. "You won today, and you'll win whatever comes next. I'll personally make sure of it." But just as Harper opened her mouth to respond to his promise, Rowan's cell phone buzzed sharply in his pocket. He pulled it out, glanced at the glowing screen, and his expression darkened instantly. "What is it?" she asked, her pulse immediately quickening with dread. Rowan lifted his eyes, his voice tightening with urgent fear. "It's the hospital." Harper froze on the sidewalk. "They said someone tried to access the NICU again," Rowan said, gripping his phone. "And this time, it wasn't Cole or Verena." The hospital hallways felt noticeably colder than usual, as if the sterile walls themselves sensed something was deeply, horribly wrong. Harper's heart thudded violently in her chest as she hurried alongside Rowan, their rapid footsteps echoing sharply against the polished linoleum floors. Her palms were profusely sweating, and her throat felt tight. She had already survived severe betrayal, public humiliation, and a near-death medical experience. But absolutely nothing terrified her the way the thought of those 3 tiny incubators being breached did. "What exactly happened?" she gasped, struggling to keep up with Rowan's long, frantic strides. "The NICU nurses reported an unauthorized, forceful attempt to enter the restricted neonatal wing," Rowan said, his voice clipped and professional. "When staff approached the individual, the person immediately ran." Harper's stomach dropped into a bottomless pit. "Ran? So they got inside the actual room?" "No," Rowan said firmly. "But they were close enough to scare the hell out of everyone on the floor." They quickly rounded the corner toward the main NICU entrance. 2 burly security guards stood by the heavy double doors, intense tension radiating from their stiff posture. One guard stepped forward immediately as Rowan approached. "Dr. Hale, we reviewed the security footage," the guard said grimly. "The suspect was wearing a visitor badge, but it wasn't issued today." "How did they get it?" Harper whispered, terrified. The guard hesitated, looking uncomfortable. "We're tracing the logs on that now, but there's something else." He turned directly to Harper. "Ma'am, the badge the intruder used was officially issued under your name." Harper felt her weak knees nearly buckle beneath her. What? I didn't request any guest badges. I haven't even left the maternity wing all day." Rowan's jaw clenched tightly. Someone is spoofing her identity. Pure panic crawled rapidly up Harper's spine like cold, bony fingers. Who would possibly do this? Cole was furious, yes, but attempting a reckless entry into a highly secure NICU? Even he wouldn't risk physically harming his own biological children. And Verena was currently sitting in police custody. So who is it? Rowan gently touched her elbow. "Come on. Let's go check on the babies first." They entered the secure NICU, instantly greeted by the steady, rhythmic, comforting beeping of tiny heart monitors. The warm, low-lit room always felt like sacred, hallowed ground to Harper, the magical place where fragile new beginnings fought their way into the harsh world. She hurried past the other nurses to the far incubators where her triplets lay. They were small and perfect, connected to numerous monitors but breathing steadily and peacefully. Noah, Grace, and Oliver, her entire reason for breathing. She touched the warm glass of the incubator gently, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mommy's here." "They're okay," Rowan murmured, checking the charts. Nothing was tampered with. Harper exhaled a long, shaky breath. Relief washed over her, but it was incredibly thin, fragile, and easily pierced by reality. "Someone is actively targeting them," she said, her voice trembling. "Why? What on earth do they want?" Rowan didn't answer her immediately. Instead, he motioned for the hovering NICU nurse to give them some private space. Once the immediate area quieted, he turned to Harper with a profound seriousness he'd never shown before. "There's a very strong possibility," he said slowly, choosing his words with extreme care, "that this has absolutely nothing to do with Cole." Harper frowned in deep confusion. "Who else in the world would want to hurt my children?" Rowan slid his hands into his white coat pockets. The fake badge wasn't the only strange thing. Security reported that the intruder didn't actually try to reach the triplets at first. They went straight to the medical supply cabinet. "The cabinet?" Harper repeated, bewildered. "Why?" "Because that's exactly where the blood type charts and genetic transfusion kits are securely kept." Rowan met her terrified gaze. Someone wasn't trying to physically harm them. Someone was desperately looking for official DNA confirmation. Harper felt the blood completely drain from her face. "Why would anyone want that?" Rowan's grim silence was infinitely louder than any answer could be. Then, a senior nurse rushed into the NICU breathless. "Dr. Hale, you really need to see this." She held out a digital tablet. Security had digitally enhanced the blurry hallway footage. The intruder's face was partially obscured by a dark hood, but not quite enough. Harper froze. She knew that face. It was a face she hadn't seen in almost 15 long years. Her completely estranged father, the man who had cowardly abandoned her. And now, he was actively trying to reach her newborn children. For a long, horrifying moment, Harper couldn't remember how to breathe. The grainy image on the tablet, slightly distorted but unmistakably him, hollowed out her chest. That face, aged by time and vice but entirely familiar, yanked her violently backward through painful years she had intentionally buried deep. Her father, Harper Sullivan, the selfish man who vanished into the night without a single goodbye. The man who callously left her and her sick mother drowning in a sea of overdue bills and broken promises. The man she hadn't spoken to since she was a terrified 13-year-old girl. "What is he doing here?" Harper whispered, her voice barely audible. "Why now? After all these years?" Rowan gently took the tablet from her violently trembling hands. "We don't know yet, but security has successfully flagged his visitor ID. It was definitely him using stolen hospital credentials." Her stomach churned with nausea. All the lonely nights she had spent crying alone after he abandoned them came flooding back in a tidal wave. The humiliating months of eviction notices taped to their apartment door. Her exhausted mother working triple shifts just to keep them afloat. The crushing, unfair guilt she carried when her mother finally became terminally sick. Harper had learned very early in life that the exact people meant to protect you were sometimes the very first ones to walk away. She hadn't ever expected him to return. She definitely hadn't expected him to return like a thief in the night. Rowan stepped closer, his voice soft. "Harper, when was the absolute last time you saw him?" 15 years ago, she whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "He walked out. He didn't call. He didn't send money. He didn't even show up for the funeral when Mom got sick and died. I honestly thought he was dead." Her voice cracked painfully on the last word. Rowan's expression softened with deep empathy. "Maybe he's desperate. Maybe something terrible happened to him. Harper shook her head vehemently. He was never desperate enough to come home. Not for me. Not for her. She stared fiercely at the innocent newborns in their incubators, the tiny, beautiful lives she would gladly die to protect. And the thought of her father, the man who couldn't even protect his own child, trying to sneakily access them, made her skin crawl with revulsion. The NICU nurse lingered nervously nearby, hesitant to interrupt. "There's more. Dr. Hale, we pulled the hospital network records from the main admissions desk earlier this morning. Someone using your father's exact name requested an urgent consultation with our genetic specialists." Harper's eyes widened in horror. Genetics? Why on earth? Rowan exchanged a very heavy, knowing look with the nurse. "Harper, there's a strong chance your father may be incredibly sick." Harper's breath faltered. Sick? Certain severe genetic disorders require very close biological relatives for stem cell or marrow treatments, Rowan explained carefully, pacing his words. Sometimes, if the child isn't a match, they look to the grandchildren. The hard tile floor seemed to tilt violently beneath her feet. "No," she whispered, backing away from the incubators. "He doesn't get to do that. He doesn't get to just walk back into my life after 15 years and demand anything. He doesn't get to use my helpless kids as medical solutions." Rowan placed a warm, steady hand on her trembling shoulder. "You don't have to make any decisions right now, but you need to know the absolute truth before he tries to reach you again." Harper swallowed hard, her pulse thundering in her ears. She felt the old, jagged wounds opening, wounds she thought she'd permanently sealed long ago with scar tissue. "But why steal a badge?" she murmured, trying to apply logic to madness. "Why sneak around like a criminal instead of just talking to me?" The nurse lowered her voice. "Because the hospital legally declined his consultation request. He wasn't authorized to learn anything about you or the baby's medical files. So, he tried to forcefully bypass security." Harper felt a deeply disturbing mix of righteous anger and cold dread twist inside her stomach. Her father had always been highly unpredictable, charming and manipulative when he wanted something, cruel and distant when he didn't get it. But this was vastly different. This was desperate, deliberate, and calculated. Rowan hesitated before speaking again, looking conflicted. "There's one more thing you should hear. The security sweep team found something dropped on the floor near the NICU entrance." He reached into his white coat pocket and handed her a crumpled, folded piece of paper inside a plastic evidence bag. Harper unfolded it slowly. Her breath quickened into a panic as she immediately recognized the handwriting, jagged, messy, and painfully familiar. It read, "Harper, I need your children. Don't make me do this the hard way." Her hands shook violently. The room spun around her. Rowan quickly grabbed the paper before it slipped from her numb fingers. Her father wasn't here for a tearful reconciliation. He was here for absolute possession. Before Rowan could say a word of comfort, another blaring alarm rang out across the floor, a specific NICU alert that made Harper's blood turn to solid ice. A panicked nurse burst into the hall. "Dr. Hale, one of the baby's monitors just spiked dangerously. We need you now." Harper's heart stopped. And when she sprinted back into the NICU, she realized the nightmare wasn't just continuing. It was escalating to a lethal level. The NICU was pulsing with frantic, terrifying urgency the moment Harper rushed inside. Bright alarms flashed aggressively overhead, casting an eerie red light across the pristine room like a dire warning from the universe itself. Nurses moved incredibly quickly but with measured, practiced precision, surrounding the smallest of Harper's babies, Oliver, her most delicate and fragile child. His cardiac monitor had spiked wildly, and his oxygen levels were dipping just enough to trigger a massive panic protocol. Harper pressed a trembling hand to her chest, desperately trying to remember how to breathe. "What's happening?" A nurse frantically checked the complicated ventilator connections. His vitals are slowly stabilizing, but someone physically tampered with the incubator's external settings. The ambient temperature was drastically shifted. Harper froze, ice in her veins. Shifted? On purpose? It wasn't a computer system glitch, the nurse said grimly, pointing to the manual override switch. Someone did this manually. Recently. Harper's vision blurred as absolute horror washed over her. First, her estranged father trying to sneak in. Now this. Someone had actually been willing to risk a fragile newborn's life just to cause a distraction. Then, Rowan stormed into the NICU with the fierce intensity of a man completely ready for war. He went straight to Oliver's side, rapidly assessing the digital charts, expertly adjusting the temperature settings, and barking medical orders with a practiced, commanding calm. Get me a full diagnostic system read. I want every single setting changed timestamped down to the second, he yelled. And electronically lock every access point on this floor. No one gets within 10 feet of these babies without triple badge verification. His powerful presence steadied the chaotic room, and for a brief moment, Harper felt the world finally stop violently shaking. But when Rowan finally turned toward her, she saw something entirely new in his dark eyes, something sharp, lethal, and controlled only by immense force of will. Harper, he said quietly, walking over to her. This wasn't your father. She swallowed a lump of fear. How do you know that? Rowan lifted a small object, sealed securely in a plastic evidence bag. It was a hospital security badge. A badge that definitely didn't belong to her father, and a badge that didn't belong to Cole either. This was found kicked under Oliver's incubator, Rowan said, his voice hard. It's a high-level duplicate access card used exclusively by hospital maintenance staff. Harper's stomach tightened painfully. Whose is it? Rowan hesitated just long enough to make her knees weaken. It belongs to a night shift HVAC technician, one who suspiciously clocked out 2 hours early tonight. Harper frowned, struggling to understand. But why would a random technician do this? Because someone paid him a lot of money to do it, Rowan said flatly. And we need to know exactly who. Before she could form an answer, the heavy NICU doors burst open, and a breathless security supervisor hurried in. Dr. Hale, we've detained the technician in the basement, he said, wiping sweat from his brow. He claims he didn't intend to actually harm anyone. He said he was just hired to do a specific job. Harper's pulse spiked into overdrive. What job? The supervisor looked nervously from Harper to Rowan, unsure of how much detail to reveal. Rowan nodded firmly for him to continue. He said a wealthy woman contacted him outside the hospital. She offered him a massive stack of cash to trigger a mild system scare so the medical staff and the mother would be highly distracted. Long. Enough for someone else to slip in and speak to the infants. She told him it was just a simple family matter. Harper felt solid ice slide down her spine. A woman? Rowan stiffened, his eyes narrowing. Describe her. He said she was in her late 30s. Tall. Very dark red hair. Wearing a highly expensive designer coat. Harper shook her head in denial. No. That can't be. Verena is already in police custody. But Rowan was already way ahead of her, his expression darkening ominously. It's not Verena. A sickening chill swept completely over Harper. She only knew one other woman with hair exactly like that. Her breath faltered as the memory surfaced. My father's second wife, Elena. Rowan's eyes widened slightly as the puzzle pieces snapped violently into place. You mentioned she never liked you. That's the understatement of the century, Harper whispered, her voice shaking. She entirely blamed me for my father leaving her for a while. She said I ruined his life with my mere existence. And now, She actually thinks my babies can physically save his. Before Rowan could formulate a response, the NICU intercom buzzed sharply. Dr. Hale, please report to the main hospital entrance immediately. Code yellow. Rowan exchanged a deeply tense look with Harper. Stay right here. Do not move from this spot. Do not talk to anyone but the security team. Harper nodded mutely, clutching the metal rail of the incubator like a lifeline anchor. Rowan strode powerfully out of the NICU just as a different guard rushed in, panting. Ma'am, he said urgently to Harper, you really need to come with me. Someone is demanding to see you loudly in the lobby. Harper's heart slammed against her ribs. Who is it? The guard swallowed nervously. A woman with dark red hair. And she violently refuses to leave the premises until she gets the babies. Harper followed the anxious security guard down the incredibly long corridor, each step feeling heavier than the last, as if she were walking through wet concrete. Her palms were damp with nervous sweat, her breathing shallow and uneven. She had bravely faced Cole. She had bravely faced Verena. She had even faced the terrifying ghost of her father's past betrayal. But the woman waiting for her now in the lobby, Harper Sullivan, was a completely different kind of danger. She was a quiet, highly venomous danger, the kind of sophisticated sociopath that smiled warmly while slowly twisting rusted knives into people's backs. When they finally reached the expansive main entrance, Harper froze in her tracks. Elena stood dead in the middle of the crowded hospital lobby, like she owned the entire building. Her tall, statuesque frame was elegantly wrapped in a burgundy, custom-tailored cashmere coat. Her dark red hair fell in perfect, expensive waves, and her porcelain expression was a cold, impenetrable mask of absolute superiority. Ordinary people subconsciously moved out of her way, without even realizing why. Power simply radiated from her, but it wasn't real earned power. It was pure entitlement sharpened by years of bitterness. The moment Elena's predatory eyes spotted Harper, her painted lips curved into a thin, poisonous smile. Well, she said, her voice as smooth and sharp as broken glass. The prodigal, ungrateful daughter finally returns. Harper swallowed hard, forcing herself to stand tall. What are you doing here? Elena? Elena took a slow, calculated step closer, her designer heels clicking loudly against the polished marble floor. I came to collect what should have been ours a very long time ago. Harper stiffened, her maternal instincts flaring into rage. My children aren't yours. They aren't Dad's. They're mine. Elena's arrogant smile didn't falter for a second. Patrick is dying. The blunt words hit Harper like a physical punch to the chest, but she refused to step back. Elena continued smoothly. He desperately needs a genetic match for an experimental stem cell treatment. It's something only very close blood relatives can successfully provide. And you want to use my newborn babies, Harper said, her voice raw with disbelief and anger. You want to selfishly take from them the exact same way he took everything from me. Elena's eyes hardened into flint. Your father gave you life. Harper, you owe him this. Owe him? Harper's voice shook with an uncontrollable fury she had suppressed for 15 years. He abandoned us. He left my mom to struggle completely alone. He wasn't there when she was dying of cancer. He wasn't there when I was forced to give up my dream school to pay off his debts. He didn't even have the decency to say goodbye. He owes me. For God's sake, Harper, Elena snapped, her facade cracking slightly. Let go of the pathetic past. This is much bigger than your petty little feelings. No, Harper said softly, her anger focusing into a steady, laser-like beam now. It's exactly about my feelings, and my uncrossable boundaries, and my innocent children, and you will never, ever touch them. Elena's porcelain mask cracked for the first time, revealing the ugly desperation beneath. You really think you can stop me? She hissed, stepping into Harper's personal space. You think that handsome doctor of yours can protect you from me? I have the best lawyers in the city. I have limitless money. And you? She looked Harper up and down with absolute disgust. You have always been so incredibly weak. Harper didn't flinch. She didn't look away. Weak people don't survive what I've survived. Elena. For the first time in her life, Elena's legendary composure visibly wavered. Before she could formulate a vicious response, Rowan appeared silently behind Harper, his mere presence feeling like a massive wall made of reinforced steel and fire. He stepped right beside her without a single word, his dark eyes locked dead onto Elena with a terrifying fury he rarely showed to the world. You will leave this hospital right now, Rowan said evenly, his voice lethal. You will not approach Harper ever again, and you will never, ever come anywhere near her children. Elena laughed, a cold, brittle sound. And exactly who are you to make that grand decision? Doctor? Rowan calmly pulled a folded legal document from his white coat pocket and handed it to the nearest armed security guard. This is a court-ordered temporary protective order, signed by a judge 10 minutes ago. It is effective immediately. Elena's arrogant smirk finally collapsed completely. You can't do this, she spat, her eyes wild with rage. I already have, Rowan replied stoically. But Elena wasn't entirely defeated. Not yet. Her eyes glittered with something much darker, something highly dangerous and unhinged. You think this ends here? She whispered venomously to Harper. Your father will get what he needs eventually. You'll have no other choice. And when you finally break... Rowan stepped forward, cutting her off, his voice like cracking ice. Get out. Security moved in forcefully. Elena glared fiercely at them, and then at Harper, a glare filled with silent promises of future harm, before turning sharply on her heel and storming furiously out of the hospital revolving doors. Harper let out a long, shaken breath she didn't realize she was holding. Rowan placed a steady, comforting hand on the small of her back. It's over, he murmured gently. But Harper's gaze lingered fearfully on the revolving doors where Elena had disappeared into the New York snow. Because deep down in her bones, she knew something Rowan didn't. Elena Sullivan never walked away without a backup plan, and she never attacked only once. The very next morning, Harper sat in a massively polished wood conference room at Fairchild and Lawson, the elite Manhattan law firm Rowan had connected her to. Outside the tall windows, the bustling city pulsed with bright winter sunlight, glittering off the surrounding skyscrapers like giant shards of broken glass. Inside the room, the tension was thick enough to taste. Her high-powered attorney, Mara Lawson, slid a neatly organized stack of legal documents across the table. Harper, what we're actively building here isn't just a standard custody case, Mara began, her tone all business. It's a full-scale, ironclad protection strategy for you and your children against multiple hostile parties. Harper nodded, her fingers lightly brushing the sharp edge of the paper. And Elena? And my father? We're filing permanent restraining orders today, Mara said confidently, along with a formal criminal complaint for attempted medical interference and bribery. She tapped a specific file. This HVAC technician's written confession is more than enough for law enforcement to trace the bribe money back directly to Elena's accounts, and possibly to your father as well. The overwhelming thought made Harper's chest tighten painfully. She had spent 15 years trying her hardest to stop her traumatic past from bleeding into her present. But now that past was violently crashing through the doors, aggressively demanding things she could never give. Mara continued, her expression darkening. There's also the highly complicated matter of Cole. His attorney sent a ridiculous letter this morning formally challenging the hospital's DNA findings and demanding immediate, unsupervised access to the triplets. Harper stiffened in her leather chair. He abandoned us while I was bleeding on a table. He said they weren't his in front of a dozen medical witnesses. Mara gave a grim, shark-like smile. And I'm going to tear him apart in court with that exact fact. His signature on the emergency parental refusal form is legally catastrophic for him. Add in Verina's medical falsifications, his crazed NICU intrusion attempt, and now his highly publicized removal from Maddox Financial as CEO. This arrogant man is in absolutely no position to gain anything in a court of law. Harper felt a complex mixture of immense relief and profound sorrow. She had once desperately wanted Cole to love their children, to build a life with them. She never wanted him to weaponize them, but harsh reality didn't bend to naive hope. Mara smoothly flipped to another page in the thick dossier. Now about your father. There's something highly disturbing you really need to see. She handed Harper a printed medical report, a confidential hospital file compiled quickly overnight by Rowan's extensive network of contacts. Harper frowned, looking at the complex medical jargon. What is this? It's his exact medical situation, Mara explained gently. And something else entirely. Harper quickly scanned the pages, each typed sentence hitting her harder than the last. Genetic marrow failure. Aggressively progressive. Prognosis poor. Then, her wide eyes reached the specific line that froze her heart solid. Potential candidate for experimental cellular treatment. Pending family match verification. Her hand trembled holding the paper. So it's actually true. He really is dying. Yes, Mara said softly. And he firmly believes that harvesting stem cells from your children is his only viable chance at survival. Harper closed her eyes, forcefully swallowing the massive ache rising in her throat. She wasn't a heartless person. She wasn't inherently vengeful. But saving the selfish man who had never once saved her, sacrificing the tiny, innocent children he never even wanted to know. No, not anymore. Mara leaned forward, clasping her hands. Harper, we also uncovered something else through our financial investigators. Something crucial about Elena. Harper looked up, startled. What about her? She's not just your father's trophy wife, Mara said, tapping the financial printout. She's his legally appointed financial guardian and sole beneficiary. Which means, if he dies before receiving this expensive treatment, she inherits absolutely everything he's amassed. Harper blinked in shock. Everything. Every single liquid asset. Every offshore investment. Every piece of real estate property. And if he lives? Mara's lips tightened into a thin line, due to a very specific, ironclad prenuptial agreement they signed. She gets virtually nothing in the event of a divorce, and his medical bills are currently eating into the estate. If he survives long enough to drain the accounts, she loses her payday. It hit Harper like a violent lightning strike. Elena wasn't fighting to save her sick husband. She was aggressively fighting to save her massive inheritance. Suddenly, Rowan appeared in the conference room doorway, slightly out of breath, looking deeply troubled. Harper, he said urgently, there's terrifying new information. Hospital security just reviewed another hidden camera angle. Harper's pulse spiked. About Elena? Rowan shook his head grimly. No. About your father. Mara frowned, standing up. What is it? Rowan. Rowan stepped fully inside the room, securely closing the heavy door behind him. Patrick didn't come to the hospital alone last night, he said. He had inside help. Harper's breath snagged on a gasp. Whose help? Rowan hesitated for a split second, then answered. Cole's. Harper's world violently lurched, and in that terrifying instant, she fully realized that the two men who had most profoundly abandoned her in life had now joined wicked forces against her. Harper felt all the air forcefully leave her lungs. Cole, the man who had once knelt and vowed to build a beautiful future with her. now aligned with the absent father who had callously abandoned her to poverty? It felt completely impossible, yet something deep in her gut told her it made a twisted, sickening kind of sense. They were two arrogant men who thrived entirely on control. Both were deeply threatened by her newfound independence. Both were panicked by the severe consequences of their own terrible actions. Rowan stepped forward to the table, placing glossy security photos down for them to see. This specific image was taken 2 hours before Patrick attempted to breach the NICU doors. That's him. And that's Cole, handing him a thick envelope. Harper stared blankly at the grainy, black and white image. Cole's expression was furious, tight-jawed, his broad shoulders stiff with stress. Patrick looked deeply desperate, physically unwell, but aggressively determined. The thick envelope passing between them felt like a physical, heavy symbol of absolute betrayal. "What's in the envelope?" she whispered, horrified. "Cash," Rowan replied grimly, "and written instructions. Your father was supposed to obtain genetic DNA evidence from one of the infants to help strengthen Cole's brand new custody claim, in exchange for Cole funding his experimental treatment." Harper's breath hitched violently. "He actually helped Patrick. In exchange for forced access to my babies." Mara, her brilliant attorney, nodded grimly. "It perfectly aligns with Cole's latest legal filing this morning. He's now legally claiming that you coerced Dr. Hale into falsifying the guardianship paperwork. He's aggressively building a false narrative that you're emotionally unstable, highly vindictive, and acting wildly against the children's best interest." Harper almost laughed out loud, not from humor, but from sheer, unadulterated disbelief. After absolutely everything he did to us, he wants to paint himself as the innocent victim? Mara leaned back in her leather chair. "Desperate? Ruined men will rewrite any story to survive their own consequences." But Rowan wasn't amused in the slightest. His dark eyes burned with a fierce protectiveness that went far deeper than his medical duty. "He's not getting anywhere near those kids," Rowan said, his voice a low growl. "Not now. Not ever. But we need to strike him first, legally and very publicly." Harper straightened her spine, pulling strength from Rowan's resolve. "What do you need from me, Mara?" "Your absolute truth," Mara replied, clicking her pen. "Every single detail, every threat he made, every moment he abandoned you. The family court needs to see the full, undeniable pattern of abuse." For the first time in her life, Harper didn't feel a single ounce of shame about her past. She felt something else entirely, power. She told them absolutely everything. Her voice remained steady, the painful memories no longer acting as heavy chains, but as vital evidence. Rowan remained seated at her side throughout the grueling session, silent but unwavering, his warm presence grounding her like a steady, rhythmic pulse. When she finally finished, Mara decisively closed her thick legal notebook. "Good. Excellent. We'll file a massive, comprehensive restraining order against Cole within the hour, and we're officially requesting immediate emergency custody protections from the judge. With the hard evidence we have, the judge will undoubtedly rule in your favor." Harper exhaled shakily. Profound relief mingled with lingering fear, the specific kind of anxiety that comes when a massive new storm forms dark on the horizon. Rowan turned to her, his face serious. "There's more." Her stomach tightened in knots. "I don't think I can physically take any more today." "You can," he said softly, looking deeply into her eyes. "You already have." He set another document in front of her, this time an internal hospital memo. Harper frowned, reading the header. "What am I looking at?" "A formal complaint," Rowan said, his jaw tight. "Filed to the medical board by Cole against me." Harper's pulse skidded to a halt. "He's accusing you of improper conduct with a patient." "With me?" Harper shot up from her comfortable chair in outrage. "What? That's a disgusting lie." Rowan nodded calmly. "Of course it is. But if the accusation sticks, I lose my medical license entirely. And he knows that. He's trying his hardest to legally remove me from your side, so you'll be forced to stand alone against him again." Harper's fists clenched so tightly her nails dug into her palms. "I won't let him do that. I won't lose the one person who's actually protecting us." Rowan's eyes flickered with a rare, beautiful moment of vulnerability. "We'll fight it. Together." Mara looked between the two of them, observing the undeniable bond, then placed the newest file on the table. "This is our ultimate counterstrike, and once we legally file it, Cole will have absolutely no path left to victory." Harper nodded, mentally bracing herself for the war. But before Mara could continue outlining the strategy, her office phone buzzed sharply on the desk. She glanced at the caller ID screen, and her professional expression instantly drained of color. "What is it?" Harper whispered, sensing the shift. Mara looked up, her voice tight with sudden dread. "The family court judge wants an immediate emergency hearing." Rowan stiffened. "When?" "Now," Mara said, grabbing her briefcase. "As in 30 minutes from now." Harper's heart pounded against her ribs like a trapped bird, because the entire fate of her children was about to be decided, and Cole would be waiting for her in that very courtroom. The imposing downtown courthouse smelled faintly of old paper, polished wood, and stale winter air as Harper stepped inside, every single nerve in her body thrumming with adrenaline. Rowan walked confidently at her right, Mara at her left, the three of them moving together with a quiet, powerful urgency that turned heads in the busy hallways. Harper's palms were damp with sweat, her stomach tight, but her spine stayed incredibly straight. She wasn't walking in here as a victim today. She was walking in as a fierce, protective mother. Inside the grand courtroom, Cole was already waiting. He was seated confidently beside his expensive, sleazy attorney, a look of smugness returning to his handsome face like an ugly stain resurfacing under bright light. He dressed the part perfectly, too, a crisp, custom navy suit, a shiny silver tie, his hair slicked back impeccably. He looked exactly like a man who believed he could easily charm a seasoned judge the exact same way he charmed gullible investors. But his arrogant eyes flickered nervously when Harper entered the room, not with guilt, but with genuine fear. He saw the profound change in her, the new strength, the unshakable steadiness, the total refusal to shrink under his gaze. Harper didn't even look at him. She took her designated seat beside Mara, with Rowan standing tall directly behind her like a silent, impenetrable fortress. The judge entered the room, a stern, silver-haired woman known for taking no nonsense, commanding absolute silence with a single, sweeping glance. "This emergency hearing has been called," she began, banging her gavel lightly, "to formally address 3 urgent matters: temporary legal custody of the minor children, alleged professional misconduct by Dr. Rowan Hale, and severe concerns for the physical safety of the infants currently in the neonatal intensive care unit." Harper's heart pounded furiously. 3 massive battles in one small arena. Cole's slimy attorney rose first. "Your Honor, my client was wrongfully and maliciously excluded from his newborn children's lives. Ms. Sullivan and Dr. Hale conspired illegally to assign emergency guardianship to him. Their actions were highly premeditated and designed specifically to sever my client's paternal rights." Rowan's jaw tightened in anger. The attorney continued, "Furthermore, Your Honor, we have strong reason to believe Dr. Hale engaged in a highly inappropriate emotional entanglement with a vulnerable patient." Mara stood up so sharply her heavy chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Objection! We have documented, irrefutable evidence proving Mr. Maddox falsified medical narratives to intentionally hide his own gross negligence and intentional abandonment." She marched forward and handed the bailiff a binder thick enough to make the judge raise a surprised eyebrow. Inside were certified copies of Cole's signed parental refusal, sworn testimony from multiple hospital staff, clear security footage showing him yelling abusively in the NICU hallway. and Verena signed police confession tying him to the falsified medical records. The judge flipped quickly through the binder, her expression flattening into a dangerous scowl. "Mr. Maddox, is this your actual signature on the parental refusal form?" Cole swallowed loudly, standing up. I was actively misled, Your Honor." "Answer the question, Mr. Maddox." "Yes," he muttered quietly. "And you knowingly left the hospital premises during a life-threatening, high-risk labor?" I thought the children weren't mine," he lied. "That is absolutely not an acceptable excuse for medical abandonment," the judge snapped fiercely. Harper felt Rowan place a steady, warm hand on the back of her wooden chair. She didn't look up, but she felt the immense warmth of it, and it instantly steadied the nervous tremor in her breath. Then Mara stepped forward again, relentless. "Your Honor, we also have fresh security evidence that Mr. Maddox has recently colluded with Patrick Sullivan, a man with an active restraining order request pending, to illegally obtain DNA samples from a secure NICU ward. Their combined actions nearly resulted in severe medical harm to a premature infant." The crowded courtroom erupted in shocked whispers. Cole's face turned a violent shade of red. "That's a complete lie." Rowan lifted the glossy security stills for the court to see. This photograph was taken exactly 3 hours before the attempted hospital breach. Cole's attorney lunged forward to object, but the judge held up her hand sharply. "Sit down, now." Cole sank back into his chair, helpless fury radiating off him. The judge leaned forward, steepling her fingers. "Based on this overwhelming evidence, temporary full custody will remain exclusively with Ms. Sullivan. Mr. Maddox will have absolutely no visitation rights whatsoever until a full criminal investigation is completed." Harper's breath left her in a massive rush. Relief, justice, and disbelief all tangled together in her chest. But the judge wasn't finished. As for the baseless allegations against Dr. Hale, she turned respectfully to Rowan. "The court finds absolutely no grounds for misconduct at this time. In fact, reviewing these files, his quick actions likely saved Ms. Sullivan's life." Rowan exhaled slowly, the deep tension finally draining from his broad shoulders. But then, the judge reached the final, unexpected page of a different file on her desk, her brows knitted together in deep concern. This is highly troubling," she murmured. Harper stiffened. "What is it, Your Honor?" The judge looked up, her eyes sharp. "Ms. Sullivan, were you aware that your estranged father filed a separate petition right before this hearing began?" Harper's blood turned to ice. "He claims to be seeking emergency medical guardianship of the infants." Rowan stepped forward quickly. "Your Honor, that man is dying and desperate." The judge lifted her hand to silence him. "I haven't ruled on it yet, but I will say this. The petition includes a sworn, signed statement with highly damaging accusations against Miss Sullivan's mental state." Harper's pulse thundered. "Accusations?" The judge closed the manila file. "And the person who submitted this supporting testimony against you is someone you know very well." Harper's breath trembled as the realization hit. "Mr. Maddox," the judge said coldly, "please step forward to the stand." Cole rose from his seat incredibly slowly, as if dragged upward by an invisible, heavy weight. For the very first time since the hearing began, he looked deeply uncertain. Not furious, not arrogant, but genuinely, profoundly rattled. Harper watched him approach the wooden stand, her pulse hammering. Whatever awful thing he had done, whatever new lies he had told, she felt the walls closing in on her again. The judge adjusted her reading glasses. "Mr. Maddox, you submitted sworn, legally binding testimony supporting Patrick Sullivan's petition for guardianship. Do you confirm this?" Cole cleared his throat nervously. "Yes, Your Honor." Mara's jaw tightened. And in your sworn statement, the judge continued, reading from the paper, you explicitly described Miss Sullivan as emotionally unstable, highly reckless, and mentally unfit for parental judgment. Harper flinched internally at the cruel words, though she kept her face completely still. Cole added quickly, desperately trying to save face, Your Honor, I was deeply concerned for the children's well-being. She completely refused to let me see them. Because you legally signed away your parental rights, the judge snapped. Losing her patience. Cole faltered. Rowan looked incredibly ready to leap over the plaintiff's table and strangle him. Mara stepped forward smoothly. Your Honor, we formally request permission to cross-examine the witness. Granted, the judge said. Sitting back. Mara approached Cole slowly, methodically, like a predator circling prey. Mr. Maddox, you claim Harper is mentally unstable. What exact medical evidence do you have? Cole hesitated, sweating. She fainted during labor. Due to massive blood loss, Mara cut in sharply, caused by a medically dangerous, high-risk pregnancy, not mental instability. Try again. Cole's jaw flexed. She made poor life choices. Such as? She didn't tell me she was pregnant with triplets until way after her second scan. Harper closed her eyes in lingering pain. She had waited to tell him because she desperately wanted to be sure all the babies would survive before he inevitably crushed her fragile hope. Mara's voice sharpened into a blade. And yet, you also told the hospital paramedics she wasn't your wife at all. That she was just some crazy woman pretending to trap you. Do you deny stating this? Cole's face drained of all color. Furious whispers rippled through the gallery of the courtroom. The judge frowned deeply. Is this true, Mr. Maddox? Cole stammered. Trapped. I was misinformed. Verena told me that. Ah, yes, Mara said smoothly, turning to the judge. Verena Lowe, the woman currently sitting in police custody, under active investigation for data tampering and severe medical fraud. Cole swallowed hard, looking physically ill. And Patrick Sullivan, Mara added, her voice rising for dramatic effect. A man who abandoned his minor child, who committed identity theft inside a hospital, and who attempted to access restricted medical areas illegally. This is the upstanding man Mr. Maddox is financially supporting for legal guardianship. The judge's expression hardened into granite. Mr. Maddox, do you understand exactly how legally and morally damaging this looks for you? Cole straightened suddenly, his utter desperation turning into wild anger. I was heavily manipulated, he shouted at the judge. Harper lied to me for years. She knew I couldn't have kids. Incorrect, Rowan said loudly, speaking through clenched teeth. Your fertility was perfectly normal. The medical record was altered to trick you, and you fell for it. The judge glared. Mr. Maddox approached the bench immediately. Cole stumbled forward, trembling. The judge lowered her voice, low enough that only the closest lawyers could hear, but the furious tension was palpable in the air. You abandoned your bleeding wife during a life-threatening labor. You attempted to forcefully enter a neonatal unit unauthorized. You collaborated with a dangerous man under active police investigation. And you are still trying to strip a fit mother of her premature newborns. Her tone sharpened to a deadly point. Your legal credibility in my courtroom is non-existent. Cole's eyes widened, sheer panic finally breaking completely through his lifelong arrogance. The judge raised her voice again for the official court record. I am officially ordering a full criminal investigation into your actions today, and your financial involvement with Patrick Sullivan. A loud gasp swept the courtroom. Harper felt her breath return in a slow, incredibly shaky wave. Cole sank backward into his chair, his hands visibly trembling. His life was over. The judge turned the pages again, scanning the remaining documents. This ridiculous petition from Patrick Sullivan is based entirely on forged timelines, unsupported allegations, and blatantly false claims of neglect. It is hereby. Before she could finish her sentence, the heavy courtroom doors burst open violently. A breathless bailiff hurried inside, running up and whispering urgently into the judge's ear. Her stern expression shifted rapidly from annoyance to confusion, then to pure, unadulterated alarm. She rose quickly to her feet. "Ms. Sullivan. Dr. Hale. You need to come with us immediately." Harper's heart slammed into her ribs with sickening force. "What happened?" The judge looked directly at her, her voice gravely serious. "It's the babies." Rowan's hand gripped the back of Harper's chair, so hard his knuckles turned white. The judge continued, "They've gone missing from the NICU." Harper didn't remember how she got from the downtown courtroom to the hospital. One moment she was staring in horror at the judge's pale face. The next she was frantically sprinting through the hospital corridors, her breath coming in raw, jagged bursts that burned her lungs. Her body moved faster than conscious thought, faster than fear. Faster than Rowan desperately calling her name as he raced closely behind her. Her babies were missing. Gone. Vanished from the NICU. Supposedly the absolute safest place in the entire building. Loud security alarms blared relentlessly overhead, and flashing red lockdown lights pulsed across the ceiling like a strobe. Medical staff rushed past them, frightened and confused by the sudden chaos. Voices echoed over the intercoms. "Check all exits. Lock down the elevators. No one gets out without clearance." Harper's heart hammered against her ribs, feeling ready to shatter into a million pieces. "This can't be happening," she whispered frantically to herself. "Not my babies. Not again." Rowan reached her side, gripping her shoulders tightly to ground her. "Harper, listen to me right now. They're alive. If someone truly wanted to hurt them, they wouldn't have gone through the trouble to take them. We will find them." But his strong voice trembled, just barely, and that infinitesimal crack terrified her more than anything else. A head nurse hurried over to them, a digital tablet shaking uncontrollably in her hands. "We reviewed the live camera feed. The triplets were physically removed by someone wearing scrubs. A surgical mask, a cap, and gloves. Full medical uniform." "Can you see their face?" Rowan demanded loudly. "No," the nurse cried. "But we tracked them rapidly through 3 hallways before the cameras suddenly went dark." "Dark?" Harper's voice cracked. "What do you mean dark?" "Someone disabled the security feed manually from a junction box," the nurse sobbed. Rowan swore violently under his breath. Harper pressed her palms hard to her forehead, fighting back a wave of dizzying panic. Who would do this? Cole was physically in the courtroom. Verena was locked in police custody. Elena was escorted completely off the premises by armed guards. The nurse hesitated, her eyes wide with fear. We found this in one of the empty bassinets." She handed Harper a small, folded note. Harper's blood ran ice cold as she quickly opened it. "If you want them back, come alone to the loading dock." There was no signature, no further instructions, just a simple demand soaked in absolute threat. Rowan grabbed the note, his jaw clenched so hard a muscle ticked in his cheek. "This is a trap. You're not going anywhere alone." Before Harper could respond, the security radios on the guards' belts crackled with frantic voices. "Suspect sighted in the northwest wing, carrying 2 infant carriers, moving rapidly toward the staff loading dock." Harper gasped. "That's the old, abandoned wing. Hardly anyone uses it." Rowan cursed. "Because it has private, unmonitored exits. Let's go." They ran. They ran faster than she ever thought her legs could move after surviving childbirth. Running faster than logic, faster than human fear. Down the long hall, bursting through heavy double doors into the dim, echoing corridor where old fluorescent lights flickered above them like nervous, blinking eyes. As they reached the absolute end of the hall, a breathless security guard sprinted toward them. Dr. Hale. MS. Sullivan. We found the third carrier discarded near the utility closet. It's empty, but the baby is unharmed. Harper's knees almost buckled in terror. Empty? Where's my baby? Foot tracks lead outside, the guard said, pointing. Into the loading dock alley. Harper violently shoved past him, barreling through the heavy metal exit door out into the icy night air. Her hot breath turned to thick vapor instantly, and then she froze in her tracks. A car engine roared loudly to life in the dark alley. It was a black SUV, its rear doors wide open, and two infant carriers were sitting inside on the seats. Rowan yelled, "Harper, stay back!" But she stumbled blindly forward, screaming at the top of her lungs, "My babies!" The SUV's bright headlights flared, blinding her. Someone inside turned toward her. It was a dark silhouette, broad shoulders, a familiar, haunting outline that made Harper's heart completely stop. Her father, Patrick Sullivan. He was still gripping one of the plastic carriers, his eyes hollow, sick, and incredibly desperate. But it was the second figure, the man seated behind the steering wheel in the driver's seat, that made Rowan curse aloud in disbelief. Cole. He had somehow slipped away from the courthouse in the chaos. He looked right at Harper through the windshield. His expression twisted into something horrific between wild panic and deranged determination. "Harper," Cole shouted over the revving engine. "We're taking them somewhere safe." Safe from her. Harper lunged forward recklessly. Rowan grabbed her arm hard to pull her back. The SUV shot backward suddenly, its tires screeching loudly against the freezing asphalt. And then, someone else stepped out from the deep shadows behind the SUV, raising a weapon. The split second before the heavy weapon fired felt like the entire world was holding its breath in slow motion. Harper froze. Rowan forcefully yanked her behind his broad body, and the SUV screeched sideways as the loud gunshot cracked deafeningly through the narrow alley. The bullet struck the hard pavement mere inches from the back tire. Harper screamed, covering her ears. Patrick ducked terrified inside the vehicle. Cole slammed his foot on the accelerator to flee. But the armed hospital security guard wasn't aiming at Harper or the innocent babies. He was aiming directly at the tires. He fired again. Pop. Hiss. More security guards burst through the loading dock doors at the exact same time, drawn by the explosive shots. The heavy SUV fishtailed violently, its back tires completely blown out, crashing violently into the solid metal railing of the loading ramp. The airbags deployed with a poof of white smoke. The doors were flung open. Patrick stumbled weakly out of the passenger side, coughing, with the precious infant carrier clutched tightly to his chest like a shield. Cole crawled out clumsily on the driver's side, clearly dazed by the airbag, but scrambling to reach into the back to grab the second carrier. "Give me my children," Harper cried, sprinting forward as Rowan and the armed security team followed closely behind her. But before anyone could tackle him, Patrick collapsed heavily onto his knees. Not from fear of the guards, but from sheer medical exhaustion. His breathing came in shallow, labored, painful gasps, his face a sickly, ash gray. He held the baby carrier out toward Harper with violently trembling hands. "Take him." "Harper," Patrick whispered, tears streaming down his wrinkled face. "Please." Harper stopped dead in front of him, the utter desperation in his eyes. For the very first time in his miserable life, wasn't selfish. It wasn't manipulative. It was brokenly human. She reached out and took the carrier gently, checking the sleeping baby inside. Patrick bowed his head to the cold pavement. "I just wanted time. I thought I could fix what I broke so long ago." Harper swallowed the massive ache forming in her tight throat. Hurting my children doesn't fix anything, Dad. Patrick nodded slowly, hot tears falling onto the asphalt. I know. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for all of it. Security arrived, roughly helping him to his feet as he surrendered completely without resistance. His final words to her were a choked whisper. You're so much stronger than I ever deserved. Meanwhile, on the other side of the wrecked vehicle, Cole desperately tried to run, even with one of his own children awkwardly in his arms. Rowan lunged like a linebacker, tackling Cole hard to the ground before he could escape the alley. The baby carrier rolled safely to a halt at Harper's feet as heavily armed security swarmed Cole, pinning him to the concrete. You're done, Rowan growled, pressing his knee into Cole's back. It's over. Cole thrashed wildly, screaming into the dirt. She took everything from me. She poisoned my life. But no one listened to him anymore, because everyone finally saw him for who he truly, deeply was, a pathetic, broken monster. He was arrested on the spot, read his rights, and charged with kidnapping, criminal conspiracy, medical interference, and severe endangerment of infants. Harper stood shivering in the alley, her shoulders shaking uncontrollably, the freezing cold air biting her pale skin. But her fierce heart was steady as she held the two carriers close to her chest. The third child was brought out safely moments later by a heroic nurse who had sprinted to safety with him when the fire alarm initially sounded. All three babies. Alive. Safe. Breathing perfectly. She fell to her knees right there on the pavement, sobbing uncontrollably. The immense relief was breaking her completely open, washing away all the trauma. Rowan knelt right beside her in the dirt, his strong arms engulfing her, his warm forehead pressed gently to hers. You did it, he whispered fiercely into her hair. You protected them. You won. Harper looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw not just the brilliant doctor who saved her life, not just the emergency guardian who stepped in when her world fell apart, but the loving man who had held her remarkably steady every single time she nearly broke. Later that week, in a peaceful, sunlit courtroom far from the chaos, the judge formally granted Harper permanent, unshared full custody. Cole's parental rights were legally and irrevocably terminated. Patrick voluntarily renounced any legal claim to the children, leaving quietly under police guard to face the severe consequences of his actions and his terminal illness in a prison hospital. Elena was formally charged as a criminal accomplice for funding the bribe. Verena faced a harsh sentencing for medical fraud and identity theft. Justice finally had a definitive, undeniable shape. Months passed. Beautiful spring finally arrived in New York City, softening the harsh edges of the metropolis with brilliant, warm sunlight. Harper happily pushed a large, custom triple stroller through the winding paths of Central Park, the gentle, fragrant wind brushing her rosy cheeks. Her beautiful babies slept peacefully, bundled warmly in soft pastel blankets. Rowan walked comfortably beside her, holding her hand. He held it not out of medical necessity, and not out of fierce protection, but out of something much deeper, something beautifully chosen. Harper, he said softly, stopping near a massive grove of blooming cherry blossoms. I don't want to replace what you lost. I just want to build what comes next. Her heart swelled with a profound, uncontainable joy. She stepped closer to him, happy tears warm against the cool spring air. Rowan, I want that too. Under the gentle, pink bloom of spring, their lips met. They kissed not as a heroic rescuer and a tragic rescued, but as two strong, equal people who had fought fiercely through the darkest night to finally find each other. The traumatic past no longer chased her. The unknown future no longer frightened her. Her family, her real, chosen family, was right here. And for the very first time in her entire life, Harper Sullivan finally felt whole. So, our incredible story has finally come to an end. And if you're still here with me, right now, reading in this exact moment, it means something in this emotional journey touched your heart in its own quiet, profound way. Maybe it reminded you of your own hidden strength. Maybe it reminded you of the dark, terrifying storms you once walked through and survived. Or maybe it simply showed you that true healing is absolutely possible, even after everything in your life feels permanently broken. You know, the ancient Stoics used to say, "The obstacle is the way." And Harper's incredible story is living proof of that philosophy. Every single betrayal, every devastating heartbreak, every profound loss, none of it stopped her. It shaped her. As the great philosopher Marcus Aurelius wrote, "What stands in the way becomes the way." She didn't rise because her life was easy. She rose because she absolutely refused to stay where the pain left her. And my friend, yes, you watching or reading this right now, maybe you're carrying your own heavy battle too. Maybe you're standing at a terrifying crossroads in your life, unsure of where to turn. Just remember, your story isn't over yet. You're always allowed to choose a new, beautiful chapter. If this journey meant something to you, even a little bit, I'd love for you to like this video. Share it with someone who desperately needs strength today. And subscribe to our channel so we can walk through more incredible stories and more healing together. You're never alone, and I'm so incredibly grateful you're here.